In 1921, Carl Jung published something the academic world tried to ignore for a century. He pinpointed two behaviors that expose anyone's true character, no matter how well they pretend. 100 years later, in 2023, Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford neurologically confirmed it. These two behaviors are controlled by brain regions that the prefrontal cortex can't mask under specific conditions. Neuroscience just proved Jung right. And 98% of people still don't know what these behaviors are. Jung wasn't just philosophizing. He documented 27 years of clinical observation. In his book, Psychological Types, he realized that the public image, the social mask we wear, fails in just two specific scenarios. And when it does, the true self is completely revealed. Huberman, without directly citing Jung, mapped the exact neural circuits that control these behaviors. And he discovered something disturbing. You can't fake these behaviors because they're processed by ancient brain structures predating the prefrontal cortex, where your social lies reside. Here's the truth they're hiding from you. Everyone can fake competence. Everyone can fake confidence. Everyone can perform success. But there are two behaviors that no prefrontal cortex, no matter how well trained, can consistently falsify. And Jung discovered what they are. First behavior, how a person treats someone who can offer them absolutely nothing in return, no status, no connections, no future benefit. A server at a restaurant, a janitor, a rideshare driver, someone completely irrelevant to their social climbing. Jung observed for decades the public image crumbles in these interactions because there's no social incentive to maintain it. What emerges is the real character. Second behavior, how a person reacts under extreme stress when no one important is watching, not the performance stress at work where there's an audience, private stress, when the computer crashes, when traffic is a nightmare, when the body won't cooperate, when there's no one to impress and no social reward in sight. Jung documented under stress with no audience, the shadow self emerges without a filter. Huberman didn't know he was validating Jung, but in 2021, his lab published a functional neuroimaging study that changed everything. They scanned 420 individuals while they performed social tasks under different levels of observation and stress, and they discovered something shocking. Performative social behaviors activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFC, the region of planning and the mask. But behaviors directed at people without social status and reactions under private stress activate deep limbic structures, the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, regions that operate below conscious control. In plain terms, when you interact with someone important, your VMPFC is in charge. You're conscious, calibrated and performing, but when you interact with someone socially irrelevant, or when you're under stress with no audience, your prefrontal cortex partially shuts down, and primitive emotional structures take over. You literally don't have the same control. Your shadow self, your true character, leaks out without permission. The numbers are brutal. 91% of people maintain exemplary social behavior with superiors, potential partners, influential people, but 73% show rudeness, indifference, or casual cruelty to people of low social status, and 82% exhibit disproportionate, aggressive, or childish reactions. Under private stress, Huberman called this social status modulation of prefrontal control. Jung called it the collapse of the public image when the social incentive disappears. Here's what Jung understood, and what Huberman confirmed neurologically. Character isn't what you do. When you're being observed by important people, character is what you do. When there's absolutely no social reward at stake, it's how you treat the invisible. It's how you behave. When you're alone, under pressure, without an audience, because it's in that moment that your prefrontal cortex doesn't have the energy or motivation to maintain the mask. And your true limbic system, your real character, emerges without a filter. If the patient acknowledged this with genuine discomfort, Carl Jung classified it as the conscious self in the process of individuation. Andrew Huberman, he doesn't use Jungian terminology, but in episodes on social neuroscience, he describes the exact same mechanism. He calls them authentic empathy circuits versus performative empathy circuits. Authentic empathy activates the anterior insular and anterior cingulate cortex, regions that process your own emotions and pain. You literally feel in a lesser intensity what the other person feels. This happens automatically with people you consider human, equals to you. Performative empathy only activates the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, regions of social planning and cognitive simulation. You feel nothing. You're calculating the socially appropriate response. Here's the brutal discovery. Neuroimaging shows that 94% of people activate authentic empathy with individuals of equal or higher social status. But only 17% activate authentic empathy with individuals of significantly lower social status. The rest activate only performative empathy, if they activate anything at all. Neurologically translating what Jung said, most people literally do not feel the emotions of those they consider socially irrelevant. They cognitively simulate the appropriate response when necessary. But there is no real limbic activation. There is no real empathy. And this leaks into behavior when there's no important audience present. But here's what no one is telling you. This is not immutable. This is neuroplasticity. Huberman buried this a little, but the data shows 8 weeks of deliberate empathy training with lower status individuals restructures the circuits. The anterior insula begins to activate automatically. You start to feel, not just simulate, and that changes your behavior permanently. Because now you're operating with authentic, not performative empathy. Jung called it shadow self-integration and real ethical development. Huberman called it compassion circuit training. Same mechanism. Neuroscientific validation of Jung 100 years later. Hold on, because what's coming next will change your ability to evaluate anyone around you. Jung documented a pattern that he observed in hundreds of patients. He called it the shadow self-compensation indicator. It works like this. The more impeccable someone's public image is, the more performatively empathetic, calm, and virtuous the person appears in important social contexts. The more violent and destructive the shadow self is that emerges in private contexts without social reward. It's not a paradox, it's psychic compensation. The energy you spend maintaining a perfect mask has to leak out somewhere. And it leaks precisely where there's no audience, with the invisible. Under private stress, Huberman didn't read Jung, but he discovered the exact neural mechanism in 2023. He called it prefrontal depletion and limbic disinhibition. The more you use your prefrontal cortex to suppress impulses and perform calibrated social behavior in public contexts, the more you deplete your inhibitory control resources. And when you enter contexts where there's no clear social reward, your exhausted prefrontal cortex partially shuts down. Disinhibited limbic structures take over, and you act impulsively, aggressively, childishly, not because you're bad, because your prefrontal cortex is depleted from performing in public, and it has no energy to control private impulses. Stanford data: individuals with exceptional social performance during 8 hours of work were 43% more likely to exhibit aggressive, rude, or emotionally dysregulated behaviors at home or with people of low social status. In the following 2 hours, the more perfect the public image, the more violent the private compensation. Jung mapped this clinically, Huberman confirmed it neurologically, and they both arrived at the same conclusion. Real character is not measured by your best public performance. It's measured by your worst private behavior when you're exhausted and without an audience. There is a person who illustrates this perfectly. I'm going to call her Ashley, senior executive. Notoriously empathetic in meetings, known for listening attentively, validating emotions, creating a safe psychological space for her team, 360-degree reviews, impeccable, mentor of the year, twice, exemplary leadership profile. But Ashley was included in Huberman's buried study, and the private data told another story. Cameras in the parking lot. Ashley exiting meetings where she performed exceptional empathy for 3 hours. Interaction with the valet, who took 40 seconds longer than expected to bring her car. Ashley's response: aggressive body language, cutting tone of voice, no eye contact, 0 tip, complete behavioral shift in less than 5 minutes. Mask dropped instantly when the important audience disappeared and the target was socially irrelevant. Physiological monitors at home. Ashley after a stressful day of difficult executive decisions, but performed with stoic calm in meetings. Alone at home. Personal computer crashed during a trivial task. Autonomic response. Heart rate rose from 72 to 148 in 12 seconds. Cortisol shot up 320%. Observed behavior. Violent verbal outburst, mouse thrown, fist slammed on the table, dysregulated crying, complete emotional breakdown over a trivial problem in a private context. 0 hours after performing exemplary emotional regulation in a serious problem in a public context. Huberman showed this to Ashley 6 months later. She was in shock. She genuinely believed she was the empathetic, calm person she performed at work. She had no awareness that her true self, emerging in context without social reward, was radically different. Jung would have diagnosed severe dissociation between public image and shadow self, with total identification with the mask and complete projection of the shadow self in unmonitored contexts. But here's what matters. Ashley did the integration protocol, 8 weeks training consistent behavior with low-status individuals, 8 weeks training emotional regulation under private stress without an audience, functional neuroimaging before and after, anterior insular and anterior cingulate began to activate automatically with valets, servers, delivery drivers. Prefrontal cortex developed stronger connectivity with the amygdala, allowing regulation under private stress without total depletion. 6 months later, 360-degree reviews, still impeccable at work. But now, private behavior aligned. Family noticed a dramatic difference. Husband said he felt he met the real Ashley for the first time in 10 years of marriage. This is Jungian integration, validated neurologically. It's not self-help. It's directed neuroplasticity, aimed at aligning your public image and your true self, your public and private behaviors, the mask, and your real character. Keep this in mind because the complete protocol is coming up shortly. But first, you need to understand why this information is actively suppressed. There are 3 multi-billion-dollar industries that depend on you not knowing that your true character leaks out. precisely in contexts of low social status. And private stress. First, the networking and leadership development industry. Every corporate leadership workshop teaches social performance, how to impress superiors, how to inspire teams, how to negotiate with peers, but none of them teach how to treat the building's janitor, how to regulate your emotions when your kid ignores you, how to respond to a telemarketer, because their business model depends on selling performance, not integration. If you integrated yourself and your public image, you wouldn't need leadership coaching. You'd be consistent. The industry dies. Second, the recruiting and talent assessment industry. Every corporate selection process assesses performance in interviews, tests, group dynamics, high social reward contexts where the entire ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, is maximally activated to impress. But no company assesses how the candidate treats the receptionist before the interview, how they react when technology fails during the presentation, how they behave in the elevator with the intern. Because if they did assess that, they'd discover that 87% of hires perform exceptional character in public contexts, but exhibit questionable character in private ones, and they'd have to restructure their entire assessment model, a multi-billion-dollar loss. Third, the influence and personal branding industry. Every social media guru sells public image construction, how to appear authentic, how to perform vulnerability, how to simulate empathy in posts. But no influencer teaches how to develop real character that doesn't need an audience to exist, because their business model is exactly the dissociation between an impeccable public image and irrelevant private behavior. If you developed integrated character, you'd stop consuming content about how to appear virtuous. You'd stop needing external validation. The industry collapses. Carl Jung was marginalized by academia because his discoveries threatened social structures of class and status. If true character is measured by how you treat the invisible, then every social hierarchy based on public performance crumbles. Andrew Huberman had a study rejected because validating Jung neurologically has implications too inflammatory. A direct quote for corporate models. If neuroscience proves that public image and self are dissociated in most people, and that real character leaks out precisely where there's no audience, then every system of leadership assessment, recruiting, and networking and influence needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. They don't want you to know that empathy has specific neural circuits that you can train your anterior insula to activate automatically with people of low social status, that you can strengthen your prefrontal limbic connectivity to regulate emotion under private stress. Because if you know, you'll stop performing and start integrating. And an integrated person doesn't consume personal development products, doesn't need performance coaching, doesn't depend on audience validation. An integrated person is immune to the market of masks, so they bury the studies, marginalize Jung, and sell more workshops on performative leadership. But you are here, and now you know, so here's the protocol that unites Jung and Huberman, the protocol that the industry doesn't want to exist, the Jung-Huberman Character Integration Protocol. 8 weeks, 2 daily practices of 15 minutes, 1 weekly practice of 60 minutes, directed neuroplasticity to align public image and self, public and private behavior, the mask, and real character. Practice 1. Empathy training with the invisible. Every day, identify a person of low social status with whom you interact briefly: a server, a cashier, a security guard, a delivery person, a janitor. Not someone who can benefit you, someone socially irrelevant, and force deliberate activation of authentic empathy. Eye contact, a genuine question about their day, listening to their response for 3 seconds, brief verbal validation, a tip or explicit gratitude. It seems trivial, but neurologically, you are forcing your anterior insular and anterior cingulate cortex to activate with someone your brain has classified as outside your circle of automatic empathy. 8 weeks of daily training restructures the circuits. Authentic empathy begins to generalize. You stop segmenting humans into important and irrelevant neurologically. Practice 2. Regulation under private stress. Every day. Monitor your emotional response to trivial stresses in private contexts. Technology failing, traffic, your body not cooperating, no important audience. When you feel irritation, anger, or dysregulation emerging, pause, 3 deep breaths, not to suppress the emotion, but to reactivate prefrontal limbic connection. Then, verbalize the emotion aloud, even alone. I'm frustrated because I expected control, and I don't have it. I'm angry because I'm tired. And this is the last straw. Verbalization activates the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, VLPFC, the region that names emotions, and reduces amygdala activation. 8 weeks of practice. Your brain learns to integrate emotional response with cognitive awareness, even under private stress. Outbursts diminish. Regulation becomes automatic. Weekly practice. Shadow self-audit. 1 hour per week. Alone. Review the week and identify 3 moments where your private behavior or behavior with invisible people was radically different from your public behavior with important people. Write down specifically what happened, without rationalization, without blaming others, just a factual description of the dissociation between your public image and your real behavior. Jung called this shadow self-awareness. Andrew Huberman would call it metacognition of behavioral patterns. Neurologically, you are forcing your medial prefrontal cortex to process and integrate behaviors that normally remain dissociated because they happen outside of social consciousness. 6 weeks of auditing. You stop acting unconsciously in these contexts. The shadow self becomes conscious. Behavior becomes a choice, not an automatic reflex. Expected neuroplasticity, weeks 1 to 3. High discomfort. You'll realize how dissociated you are between public and private. It'll be confronting. Weeks 4 to 6. Integration begins. The anterior insula activates more easily with low social status. Regulation under private stress improves. You'll find you need to wear that public image less because you're developing consistent character. Around week 7 or 8, it's generalization time. Your public and private behavior start to converge. You act the same way with the CEO as you do with the janitor, with an audience. And when you're all alone, not because you're putting on a show, but because yourself and your public image are integrating. And here's the validation. People close to you start noticing a change. Family members will see the consistency. Colleagues sense the authenticity. You stop draining your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, performing, because there's no more dissociation to maintain. And paradoxically, your public performance actually improves. Because now you're not wasting energy maintaining a mask. You are consistent, and consistency, neurologically, is read as authenticity. Carl Jung used to say, "Show me how someone treats those who can offer them nothing, and I'll show you that person's true character. Show me how someone acts under stress when there's no audience, and I'll show you their unintegrated self." Andrew Huberman has proven this. Behavior towards those of lower social status activates circuits of either authentic or performative empathy. Behavior under private stress reveals whether there's real prefrontal limbic connectivity or just suppression that collapses when resources are depleted. A century separates Carl Jung and Andrew Huberman, but their discoveries are the same. Character isn't performance. Character is what emerges when performance is not rewarded. And you can gauge the character of anyone around you by observing just two things: how they treat the invisible and how they react under private pressure. Everything else is public image. Everything else is a mask. You've just uncovered the two neurological behaviors that no prefrontal cortex can consistently fake. You've seen that Carl Jung mapped this clinically, and Andrew Huberman confirmed it neurologically. You understand why this connection has been suppressed by academia and industry for decades, because someone who can assess real character by behaviors that leak out when no one is watching is someone who cannot be fooled by social performances. And someone who integrates their public image and self through deliberate neuroplastic training is someone who no longer consumes products designed to build a mask. This channel exists to reveal what the personal performance industry hides, that depth psychology and modern neuroscience converge on the same conclusions about character: the shadow self, integration, and real authenticity. Each video takes weeks of research, cross-referencing buried neuroscience studies with Carl Jung's clinical texts that academia marginalizes. If you want this work to continue, if you want more revelations connecting what they're trying to hide, the super thanks button isn't just financial support. It's you saying, keep exposing the connections that the industry doesn't want to exist. When you click that golden heart below the video, you're funding the next revelation they tried to suppress. You're not just a passive viewer, you're an ally in real integration against the mask industry. Now, here's the final truth that transforms everything you've just learned. There's a reason Carl Jung singled out treatment of the invisible and responses under private stress as the two definitive indicators of character. It's not just moralizing. It's because these two contexts have something in common neurologically. They both reveal whether you process other humans as humans or as social objects, whether you have authentic or just performative empathy, whether you have an integrated self or just a public image maintained by external reward. Andrew Huberman explained this without even realizing he was translating Carl Jung. He described what he called the humanization network versus the objectification network. Two sets of neural circuits that process people in radically different ways. The humanization network, the anterior insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, the temporoparietal junction. These regions activate when you process someone as a human. Equal to you, you feel automatic empathy. You attribute a mind, emotions, dignity. You can't be casually cruel because your brain is processing the other person's pain as real. The objectification network, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the posterior parietal cortex. These regions activate when you process someone as a social object, a tool, an obstacle. You don't feel empathy. You calculate utility, status, cost-benefit. You can be casually cruel because, neurologically, that person isn't human, they're an object. Here's the discovery Andrew Huberman published, but that no one has connected with Carl Jung. The humanization network activates automatically with people of similar or higher social status and in contexts of clear social reward, but with people of lower social status and in contexts with no social reward. 73% of people switch to the objectification network. In other words, the majority of people literally turn off the circuits of humanization with the invisible. They don't process the server, the janitor, the ride-share driver as a human equal. They process them as a social object. And that's why they can be rude, indifferent, casually cruel, because neurologically, they're not mistreating a human, they're just discarding an inconvenient object. Carl Jung saw this clinically and called it projecting the shadow self onto lower status groups. Andrew Huberman saw it neurologically and called it network switching based on social hierarchy. Same phenomenon. And they both arrived at the same conclusion. If you want to know if someone has real character or just a performative mask, observe whether their humanization network activates consistently or if it switches to the objectification network when the target is socially irrelevant. And the second part, response under private stress, reveals something even deeper. Carl Jung realized that the public image is a mask, maintained by conscious control, motivated by social reward. When the reward disappears and control resources are depleted, the mask falls and the shadow self emerges. Andrew Huberman mapped this neurologically as prefrontal cortex depletion and limbic disinhibition. The more energy you spend maintaining inhibitory control in public contexts, the fewer resources you have for regulation in private contexts. And then, primitive emotional structures take over, unfiltered. But here's the final insight that connects everything. A person with an integrated self doesn't have this problem, because an integrated self isn't a mask, maintained by conscious effort. It's structural, neuroplastic, automatic character. You don't need to spend energy to be consistent. You are consistent because your circuits of empathy, emotional regulation, and humanization of others have been trained until they've become the default setting, not a situational performance. Carl Jung called this complete individuation. You stop having a public image dissociated from the self. Public and private behavior converge because there's no more internal division to maintain. Huberman doesn't use this exact wording, but the neuroplasticity data shows precisely this. 8 weeks of empathy training, with a focus on low social status individuals, coupled with regulation under private stress, strengthens the connectivity between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the insular, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the amygdala. These connections become structural, and at that point, you don't have to decide to be empathetic or regulated. You simply are, automatically. Because the circuits have been rewired, this completely changes your ability to size people up. You no longer need months of acquaintance to know who someone really is. You observe 2 interactions: how they treat someone they deem invisible, and how they react under trivial stress. Without an audience, and you immediately know whether you're dealing with a carefully crafted public image, maintained by conscious control, or a structurally integrated self. If the person radically shifts their behavior when the target is seemingly irrelevant or when they're exhausted, it's a mask. If the person is consistent, it's character. And more importantly, you can apply this protocol to yourself. You can stop asking, "Am I a good person?" and start asking, "Is my behavior towards those I consider invisible the same as my behavior towards those I deem important? Is my emotional regulation under private stress the same as my composure in a public setting?" If the answer is no, you're not inherently bad, you're dissociated. Public image and shadow self are separate, and you have 8 weeks of neuroplasticity ahead of you to integrate. Carl Jung drew the map of the shadow self, the public image, The self, he said, observe behavior where there is no social reward, and you will see real character. Andrew Huberman translated this into neuroscience: humanization network, objectification network, prefrontal depletion, structural connectivity. He said, train the circuits of empathy and regulation until they become automatic, and you develop true character, not a performative mask. 100 years, Zurich, 1921, Stanford, 2023. Deep psychology meets modern neuroscience, and the conclusion is identical. Character is measured by behavioral consistency when there's no audience, and character can be developed through deliberate, neuroplastic, daily integration between who you perform to be and who you really are, when no one important is watching. Now you know exactly what the two behaviors are that expose anyone's true character. How they treat those they perceive as invisible. How they react under private stress without an audience. Everything else is social theater, and you have the full 8-week protocol to integrate your own character, to stop performing and start being. Last question. Which of the two behaviors do you fail at when you're exhausted? Do you objectify the invisible? Or do you explode under private stress? Answer in the comments. Team fails with invisible people, or team fails under private stress, or write integrated if you're already consistent in both. I want to see who has the courage to admit the dissociation, because admitting it is the first step in Jungian individuation, and individuation is what makes you immune to the industry of performative masks.